Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this beautiful spring evening. My name is Emily Vale. I'm the Executive Director of the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, and this is Water Science Through Storytelling, Film Screening, and Panel Discussion. So the Hudson River Watershed Alliance works to unite and empower communities to protect their local water resources. We support local watershed groups, help municipalities work together on water issues, and communicate as a collective voice across the Hudson Valley. So tonight's Zoom webinar is a webinar, so participants will be on mute and will not have their video on, but we hope that helps your bandwidth for the film screening and panel discussion. So if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, make sure that the drop-down menu is clicked to panelists and attendees, and go ahead and say who you are, where you're zooming in from, so we know who's here with us in our virtual film screening theater. One other notice to make is that if you have questions for the panelists when we get to that section, we encourage you to use the Q&A box, which is down at the bottom of your screen, rather than putting those questions into the chat. It just helps us keep track of those, and we'll use that to pitch those questions to our panelists at the end of the program. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Kate Meyerdurks from Siena College.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm Kate Meyerdurks, and I'm a faculty member at Siena College. I'm also on the board of the Hudson River Watershed Alliance and director of THIRST, a collaborative network of researchers working in their respective local watersheds that aims to share resources and use common methodologies to explore questions of both scientific and community significance. So I want to take a moment to thank our organizers, partners, panelists, and funders of this event. This event has been organized by Siena College and the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. Funding is provided by the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Science, CUAHSI, through Let's Talk About Water, a program that aims to, through film, inspire discussion and spark debate about local, regional, and global water issues. So we are hoping to kick off this event by showing a short film, A Living River, by writer, filmmaker, and adventurer Jon Bowermaster. For the past several years, Jon and his One Ocean Media Foundation, Oceanate Films team, have focused on a series of short films about the environmental risks to and hopes for the Hudson River Valley. Despite its polluted reputation, the Hudson River is teeming with life. A Living River describes the incredible ecosystem of the Hudson River, from tiny glass eels to the massive 14-foot-long Atlantic sturgeon. The film shares work from organizations like Riverkeeper and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to use lessons learned from its past as a bustling commercial fishery to its present as an ecosystem in recovery in order to protect its future. Our goals for showing this film are twofold. First of all, we wanted to start the evening by sharing a hopeful story about the ecology of the Hudson River and those who are working hard to clean and protect it, but also to highlight an example of effective watershed science storytelling. Please enjoy. Take it away, Allie.
Thank you so much, Allie, for running tech and sharing your screen. Let's give a virtual round of applause. Feeling like I just want to celebrate that beautiful film, Jon. I remember the first time I saw that film when it came out in 2019, and just filled with such a sense of wonder and appreciation for all the wildlife in the Hudson River. So I'm going to invite our panelists to turn on their videos and come on screen. So again, this program is Water Science Through Storytelling. We just watched the film A Living River by Jon Bowermaster, and we're going to transition now to our panel discussion. And again, this program is organized by the Hudson River Watershed Alliance and Siena College with funding from Let's Talk About Water through CUAHSI. So we're going to get started with our panel and have some introductions. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order and call on each of you. So let's go ahead and start with Jon. So introduce yourself and give us a brief introduction of your work telling stories. And what does storytelling mean to you?
Well, great. Thank you, Emily. It's a privilege always to hang with you, no matter the environment. And I'm always thrilled to, we make these short films to share them. We started this Hudson River Stories project 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. We've made 20 plus, almost 30 short films that look at different issues, both kind of environmental concerns and hopes for the Hudson. But you know, and it's like kids. I mean, we've made 30 of these films. I hesitate to say which are my favorites, but this one we just watched was up on the list, because it reminds us that even though you may, you know, look at the Hudson and think that it's dead, and many people do, it's in fact very, very much alive. In regard to storytelling, I mean, that's what I do. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist. I'm not and to a certain degree, I'm not even an activist. But I try and influence with the stories. I do, and I'm a big believer that media makes a difference. You know, I'm kind of multilingual when it comes to media. I've written a dozen books. I've made 30 plus documentary films. I do a weekly radio show on Radio Kingston, the Green Radio Hour, on and on and on. But it's all with the same mission, the same goal of telling these stories, many of which have an environmental backdrop. So I'm a 33-year resident of the Hudson Valley, and I'm thrilled to be able to make these films to remind people that you don't have to travel halfway around the world to make interesting films or find interesting stories. They're in your backyard, literally. So thanks again for the forum, Emily. It's great.
I'm muted. Thanks so much, Jon. It was great to show your film, and thanks so much for being on the panel. So next we have Kathy High.
Hello, and thank you, Emily, for inviting me to be part of this panel too, with my esteemed partners here. So yes, my name is Kathy High. I'm a professor in the arts department at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I'm also the head of that department. And I've been a filmmaker for most of my life. I also work, so I teach filmmaking at RPI. I also work at this kind of interdisciplinary hybrid area of art and science. And so I have a laboratory in the Biotech Center at RPI, and I'm really interested in introducing students to who are coming from the sciences and engineering to art, and who are coming from art to the sciences to get their hands wet. So this is something I deeply believe in. This also leads me to my deep love of working with the Sanctuary for Independent Media, one of the projects that we've been working on for a while, which is literally coming to fruition this weekend, is called Nature Lab. Nature Lab stands for North Troy Art, Technology, and Urban Research in Ecology. And it is a center, an environmental center, education center that is for the community. It's practicing DIY science, citizen science. We're looking at air, soil, and water. And so we also have a radio station, a low power radio station, WOOC-FM, and we tell radio stories as well as a lot of other media stories. So telling stories is a way to get information out, to get people engaged, to get students engaged, and to get people to really see the value of the work that they're doing on any front. So I really believe in these things and have for a long time. So thank you.
Great, Kathy, thanks so much for being here. We're going to go next to Branda Miller.
Hello, I am Branda Miller, and I am Kathy High's collaborator. I'm very proud to be that. And it's true, we're very excited because we have an abandoned building in Troy that has been transformed into a level 1 bio laboratory. And Riverkeeper is collaborating with us this Saturday with youth from our community who are testing the Hudson River water. And it's been many years to get to this point. So we're really, really excited. And there's Rebecca in there, and we're excited to collaborate with Rebecca and Riverkeeper. So I also am a professor at RPI, and I'm also a media artist. And I'm really interested, I teach documentary practice, and I'm very interested in the power of documentary to create a participatory space for shifting the voice of the subject to being an active producer in the media, in the storytelling. And so I'm especially interested in using media to amplify the voices who are misrepresented, who are underrepresented, and finding, I think that interdisciplinary media offers extraordinary spaces to engage in stories with youth. So I've been doing this for, I guess really it's coming on 3 decades right now. And we always get to learn something new. And I would say that at the core, it's really about deep listening. And I'll say that in honor of our colleague, Pauline Oliveros, who I know had her creative influences, across the Hudson River Valley. But listening to the river, listening to our ancestors who told the first stories of the river, and listening to the youth who are obviously the future, of the river. And so we are in a great spot being by the Hudson River and telling stories. So it's really, we want to thank you, the Hudson River Watershed Alliance and Siena College for bringing this together, this kind of special and unique conversation about the connection between water science and storytelling. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Branda. We'll go next to Will Lytle.
Hey everybody, how you doing? My name's Will Lytle. I'm an illustrator and comic artist just outside of Woodstock here. And so I'm a Catskill born and raised artist. The natural world's always been a huge part of my life, and the waterways the same. So I try to kind of pay it back a little bit by depicting that natural world in my art, and trying to use the art to educate people and inspire people to get involved with the natural world and to sort of find their place in that sort of tapestry of life all around us. So that's me.
Great, thanks so much, Will. We've got some multimedia represented here on the panel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. And last but not least, Dr. Ann Toomey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here today. My name is Ann Toomey, and I'm an assistant professor of environmental studies and science at Pace University. And my research, I've been really interested in actually thinking about like how we can do research differently to better engage the public. So this is across a lot of different areas. I've done work in Bolivia looking at different perceptions of science in the Bolivian Amazon, and I'll be going actually in a couple of weeks to do some research with farmers in Pennsylvania and how they perceive science. But this picture behind me shows some of my connection to waterfronts. Because I'm a professor at Pace in New York, a lot of my research has been on urban waterfronts and like how people use waterfronts. So why urban waterfronts, even if they're extremely polluted, like this picture behind me is Coney Island Creek, which is the 3rd most polluted water body according to some standards in the city, but it's used on a daily basis for fishing, even for bathing, and for religious purposes and gatherings. It's the backyard of the community that lives there. So how can we, when we're trying to restore waterfronts and revitalize them, we have to think about existing uses and the social and cultural meanings that communities have had. And when we interviewed people on this site, people were saying that they've been there coming to that spot for 20 years, right? So thinking about how do we as we're restoring and cleaning up, how are we making sure that the people that have been using these sites can continue to use these spaces and value them as they have done in the past.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone for being here. So I'm going to get us started with some targeted questions to each panelist. We'll go in that same order. So we're going to start with Jon. You teach a course at Bard College on multimedia environmental storytelling. What are some key messages that you share with your students that might also be helpful for water advocates to hear?
Well, it's interesting. I've done this just a couple times at Bard, and now we're doing it for adults, and we're doing it for high school students as well. That same, and the class is really simple. Choose an environmental story, choose a medium, and combine them. And it could be anything from short films to one student at Bard did a 50-page novel. One student did a soundscape that involved, his re-recording of a Pete Seeger song. One young student made a zine out of dryer lint. Another student made an art illustration that was the size of 2 classrooms, illustrating what he perceived to be beneath the surface of the Hudson River. So it's been really rewarding to me to encourage them to use these different mediums. But again, as I said, I'm a big believer that media can make a difference, and I love the fact that that there are all these new mediums to explore with. It's not just, I was a little concerned when I started teaching the class that I'd get 16 short films, and instead I got 16 very different projects. No, it's been good, and we have the luxury of this incredible and these incredible environmental stories out there. I say this all the time, even though I have absolutely no empirical evidence or support for it, that there are more environmental activists in the Hudson Valley per capita than anywhere else in the country. And so far, no one's really challenged me, even though I keep saying it, which I think sometimes we get a little spoiled by and take for granted. Emily, I mean, your group is a perfect example of a group that, oh, who's that? It's like a...
Oh, this is Tipatina. She loves Watershed storytelling, so she wanted to be involved. Please continue.
No, but we've got Siena Hudson and Riverkeeper and Clearwater, and then when we researched how to share our short films about the Hudson River, we came up with another 300 groups who work on environmental issues here up and down the Hudson, from Saratoga to Manhattan. That doesn't happen in every part of the country. So I sometimes I worry that we take it for granted that we have all these protectors out there, but I think we need to constantly be reminded that you guys are out there doing, you're working really hard and committing a lot of time and energy, and that we should appreciate it more and more and more.
That's great. I think it's so exciting to hear about all of these different media choices from your students and thinking about the possibilities of what a soundscape about water issues might look like, what a lint-based art piece might look like. That really got me thinking about my microplastic load actually coming out of the dryer. So thanks so much for that, Jon. Next, we're going to hear from Kathy and Branda. We know that youth voices are so valuable to these conversations, and Branda, you touched a little bit on this in your introduction, the importance of hearing from voices that may not have been heard in the past. How do you both work with youth to tell water science stories? And I think we're going to start this by having Allie share her screen again and show a short clip from a film that was developed with Sanctuary for Independent Media with youth from Troy.
Thank you. We'll show the first 3 minutes of Echoes from Lock 1. Thank you.
Allie, make sure you're unmuted so we get sound.
Fighting for our future because we don't know the truth. And in society, feel real love, true love, all its irony, no escaping. Constantly anticipating a new generation. Ain't no waiting, we ready for a change. It's messing with our brains. Messing with our brains. Messing with our brains. Messing with our brains. Fighting for the Hudson, our water is important. The corruption of our government is making us appreciate the values of our city. As the people, fight for believing. These guys' mistakes increase their rate. For justice, no more waiting. For justice, no more waiting. For justice, no more waiting. For justice, no more waiting.
They live along the shores of the Hudson River at the beginning of the Erie Canal, Lock 1, the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution.
The history of the Erie Canal and the devastating effects it has had on our community are mostly unknown, even to the people of Troy who live right next to it. Our river and our neighborhood have been poisoned by a legacy of pollution.
This is our call to action for justice.
And for our future.
No more waiting.
No more waiting.
We learned that just feet from our door, a Mohican village named Unawat's Castle had a sacred burial ground. In the 1600s to mid-1700s, before the United States existed, the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohicans were forced by increasing pressures of the Dutch and English colonists to leave their homes on the shores of the Hudson River, relocating from Troy to Massachusetts to Wisconsin. Mohican means people from the waters that are never still. This is their poem. You are one who walked yesterday, pulled from your place in time. And now I see that your feet once stood here, imprinting the earth where I stand, in moccasins I will never see, dancing, bending in the same sun, to a song I will never hear. The stories you would have told were silenced by other tongues, yet your blood is in mine, a link over time. I imagine your life from these feelings. Though I see you belong to undisturbed, covered with this dust we share. Now walk with those who are gone.
We can stop there.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So again, how do you work with youth to tell water science stories?
Well, so I'll start with the answer and then I'll pass it to Kathy, and I'll address in particular the 3 minutes you just watched. Like, how did we do that with them? We worked for 20 days together. We only had 20 days where we shot together. This was a group of youth who were part of New York State workforce development funding through the Rensselaer County Summer Youth Employment Program. So they all had to qualify by being below the poverty line. For most of them, it was their first job. And for most of them who had grown up, like right there in North Central Troy and around that, they had almost no connection to the river. And so the beginning was just creating a space of trust and listening. And sharing certain basic skills all the way from theoretical ideas, historical ideas, to technical production skills, so that they could create their own story. And so at the core, it's not just a collaboration with youth to tell the stories, but with youth mentors, artists, scientists, environmental organizers, activists, historians. And so what you saw was that we had a workshop that went for several days where we invited the indigenous hip hop artist, JOC, to work with the youth. And they created the lyrics of that opening piece with JOC. They created the beat, right? And then when you go to the next segment, the one about the Stockbridge-Munsee community, we invited a high school English teacher to work with the youth and to come in and do some workshops on poetry and different poetry through the ages. You know, we learned, and artists, we learned about the Hudson River painters. There were all kinds of ways that the youth studied and researched the history of the arts and culture that came from the river. And so through that, shape came. So I guess at the core, that is really a description of a little window of the kind of participatory process that we went through. And I think I'm going to shift it to Kathy as we talk more about all the different kinds of interdisciplinary media we use, because when we're working with the Uptown Summer Youth or other youth workshops, we're really integrating video, radio, bio art, comics, public art. And I will pass it to Kathy now to continue. Thanks.
Thank you, Branda. Another example from the film was that one of the activities we did with the Uptown Summer Youth that Branda was talking about for those 20 days was to start doing some testing of the Hudson waters and to test for antibiotic resistant bacteria, you know, which we all have heard about this. So we ran this workshop with a local high school teacher and a professor from RPI. And the students really got into it. And one of the woman who was narrating the beginning of the piece got so interested in it that she decided she wanted to become a scientist from that very lab. So I think this idea, and this just goes back to the idea Branda was talking about interdisciplinarity, this idea that when you get your hands wet, when you get your hands into something, that something becomes very material and very tangible. And this is when people begin to really kind of process what is happening and what can happen with that information. And then, as Branda said, we also work with radio. I'm working with a group on a soil testing project. We just produced a comic book, so obviously that's something that's really a very powerful tool to get out into the community. And that was produced by students. So I think that these kinds of messages are really understood best when they do this kind of joining of looking at the sciences, looking at the art, and then bringing it together in some form of a media to be presented to a kind of public. So with Nature Lab, we have one group, as we said, who are working with Riverkeeper, who we've been working with for the past year. And the first lab for testing the Northern Hudson is going to start this weekend in our new DIY, community center lab. The thing is, last year we actually started, and there was, this pandemic thing you guys might have heard about, and we couldn't go out and test the water. So what we did was the youth fellows who were part of the project with Riverkeeper, who are teenagers, who are from the community, and young women of color devoted to science. They started making stories. They started making radio stories instead of being able to actually do the lab testing. So they learned a little bit about it, but then they started interviewing other people, and they put together the confluence that Emily mentioned earlier, which was a great conference of people from up and down the Hudson, where we were able to show Echoes from Loch One. They showed another film that they've made. And in fact, they're finishing another film that's going to be shown at Riverkeeper's Fisherman's Ball in June. So there's a lot of production that kind of overlaps in this way that's interdisciplinary. And to me, I think that that's something that allows people to start to speculate about what their futures might be. And while we do rely on documentary a lot, I also believe in speculative fiction, like imagining what our futures could be. And that comes out a lot in this media. I could go on, but I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Brenda. I love the idea of participatory art, and also thinking about how that goes right hand in hand with participatory science, and how learning scientific methods is a form of storytelling too, that can really be transformational. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Great. All right, we're going to go to Will next. So Will, you wrote a book called Little One and the Water that you wrote and illustrated.
Yeah, what's up?
That uses incredible scientific information based on stream studies. Can you talk a little bit about how you used that scientific information to inform that work and what you hope readers might take away from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a remarkable opportunity to work with the Catskill Waters Project, which put me right sort of in the mix with OSMAP, the Ashokan Watershed Stream Management Program. And we were specifically looking at the Little Beaverkill watershed, which is like part of the Ashokan Watershed, one of the streams that comes down into it. And I just got to hang out at the offices and talk to them. And I say I got like Stream Management 101. They just kind of took me through all this sort of modern approach to managing streams, and which has changed a lot over the last just few years, just sort of major paradigm shifting of how to manage water without impacting the ecosystem negatively. So it was amazing. I learned a lot. And then, it's a kid's book. It's a picture book. There's not a lot of real heavy duty sort of like word-based education, but basically what it is they're just very detailed drawings of the stream as it's going through its different stages, going from I started at the Ashokan and then went upstream towards the headwaters. So I was able to visually depict some of those stream management techniques. And, the hope was that kids just almost ambiently would look at those pictures and see those pictures basically as a image of a healthy stream and what a healthy stream looks like and should feel like. And, in that early moment, maybe it's not necessarily kind of, numbers-based science and laboratory-based science, but it's building this sort of spirit of, being involved with a healthy ecosystem and appreciating a healthy ecosystem. So that was kind of the hope, is that almost through osmosis, just looking at the images and being, inspired by the images, kids would kind of have a sense of a healthy ecosystem and have an expectation of that and stuff like that. So that was kind of the vibe. It was a lot of fun, definitely.
That's great. Thanks so much, Will. I was amazed to learn that you had incorporated the results of the Hudsonia habitat study for the town of Woodstock.
Oh man, yeah, don't even get me started. I just poured over that book.
I'd like to actually get you started if you don't mind. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah. Well, so that it was this tome of knowledge, this incredible thing that just spanned every sort of ecosystem in the area and all the different sort of flora and fauna species. So that was sort of another aspect of the sort of specific details, is what animals and what plants are in each ecosystem and what to be looking for and what kind of characters to recognize. And, so all of that, just trying to be an immersive sort of experience for kids to get them interested in going outside and looking for those characters and stuff. But yeah, that book was incredible. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think I still have my giant binder that they photocopied me.
The detail is remarkable with all the, it's very scientifically based as well. So thanks so much. We had a question where your book is available to purchase, and we'll talk about where you can find all these folks afterwards, but is it available to purchase?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there should be a few copies left at the Golden Notebook bookstore in Woodstock, and there should be some at the Rough Draft Cafe and Bookstore in Kingston, New York. And then you can always just hit me up on social media, Thorneater Comics on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, and I mail them out to people all the time. So hit me up if you'd like to check one out.
Great. Thanks, Will.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily.
We want to make sure everyone can find our panelists after the fact too. So we'll be sharing, all of their information. So we're going to go to Anne next. And you've been thinking a lot about research and stories and decision-making. And we know that facts don't always change minds, but stories can and do inform decision-making, and wondering if you can speak to this.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the first part. I think the environmental sciences have been pretty guilty of believing that facts can change minds, right? Often I think about the inconvenient truth and Al Gore with the graphs, just like so, determined. If we just look at the graph, but that hasn't been shown to be true. And now there's been more and more research in the cognitive sciences and the policy science communication. Really the cognitive psychology. There's so much out there. There's some really great books that I can also post in the chat to look at. But increasingly, it's understood that we don't absorb facts. We absorb facts into our existing beliefs, right? So we have a belief, and the belief is not really shaped by like factual evidence. It's shaped by our worldviews, by our experience, by our social connections. The social piece of it is so key. Who is in our networks, who are in our families, the people around us. And this is because like a lot of this is evolutionary, right? Like we're designed to be part of a social network, as opposed to like we're designed to survive and to work and cooperate and collaborate. We're not designed to be right. That's not like how our brains work. And so the more that this is starting to filter into science communication, the more we're learning out, all right, we have to get away from just giving people the facts for especially in contentious issues like climate change, vaccinations, where people feel very strongly because of a pre-existing belief. It's not going to work to just try to argue someone out of an idea based on, the evidence. What really does start to work is, I think there are two things, and stories is one, and stories is really interesting because there's some really interesting new work by neuroscientists that are showing that actually the part of our brain, when we hear a story, And there's an emotional arc to it, right? And we start to listen and we start to hear the story, and it actually lights up part of our brain that is as if some of that is what like we're in our own personal memories and experiences. So actually it's this amazing shift where through the virtue of hearing stories and connecting to stories, we can develop a sort of empathy. And that is almost like as if we've had that experience. So they can be extremely powerful. And this is why often I think there have been some studies that have shown that like people that read novels are often more empathetic. And that I think that points to some of the research findings there. The other thing that is really another way to engage people without, giving them facts is through actually behavior. And this is, it's kind of counterintuitive. We think, well, we need to change attitudes, and then they have a different attitude and change behavior. But actually, we can start to use some ideas where just get people involved, like bring people down to the waterfront. Doesn't matter what they think about the water yet, just have that as a starting off place, and then see what develops from there. So I think that points to a little bit to like Kathy and Branda's approach, as you were talking about, of really getting people engaged in the citizen science, bringing people down to the waterfront, then the stories emerge from that, and then the attitudes can shift. So there's just some really great work that's being done in all these other fields that I think are really going to shed light and shift the way that environmental science is being communicated in the future.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so fascinating to hear about the role of neuroscience and psychology and thinking about how the stories are told, but also how the stories are received by the listeners and what that experience is like for people. It's really fascinating. So if you have a question for any of our panelists, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I have a couple more questions, but we're going to get to your questions in just a minute. So this is now to opening it up to the whole panel. What elements make a story particularly compelling or meaningful?
I'll jump in.
Sorry, Will. Sorry, Will.
Oh no, go on, John. If you
one word, people.
There you go.
Yeah. For me at least, yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I always try to think of it as like a truly effective story combines two sort of opposing energies of universal experience, something that ties us together and kind of makes us feel like the experiences we've had are shared by others. And then novel experience, new information that sort of enriches our life. So I don't know, I always feel like a good story contains those two kind of opposite poles. I don't know.
I guess for me, another thing is passion. Like when somebody's really passionate about something and they really commit themselves to some part of that storytelling in a way that passion comes across, it's very effective and infectious. So people become then, kind of compelled to develop that thing that Anne was talking about in terms of that kind of empathy, I think. And this also, I think, for me, comes across with specifics, with details. Like the details are things that people really relate to. Like what a river stone feels like in your hand, those kinds of little things, what the river smells like, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that really, key into people's senses. And that's really beautiful, I think.
Thanks, Kathy. I think it's so helpful for you to give those examples of the river stone feeling, because I think some of us, if we're scientifically inclined, we hear details and we think, yes, I want to explain every detail of my important research to the nth degree. But I think those kinds of details maybe are less important than the feelings, right? That it felt this way to hold in my hand, or it smelled this way. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay. How can storytelling have an impact? How have you seen maybe your stories have an impact, or other particularly impactful stories that have been told?
I'll jump in. We come from kind of the films we make come from kind of a documentary background, so that they do arrive with with a point, whether the point is decided in advance or not. There have been a couple examples of films that we've done about the Hudson River and Hudson River issues that have been used to help sway public opinion or even votes or politicians. We made a short film called Anchors Away. Remember when they wanted to park 43 barges between Yonkers and Kingston, oil barges filled with oil. And there was a huge public outcry. And we made just a 7-minute film, 8-minute film, which was used quite intensely by a variety of different groups up and down the river to kind of educate people and influence decisions. And in the end, I think there were 10,000 comments sent to the Coast Guard saying that these communities did not, these individuals, these communities did not want oil barges parked off their coasts or off their shorelines. And the Coast Guard responded that they couldn't even read them all. They didn't have the capacity to read them all. So, and in the end, initially the state said no barges, and now it's thanks to Congressman Maloney. There's a federal law, national law, that says that barges cannot be anchored between Yonkers and Kingston. So I mean, there are these kind of rare but powerful examples of media making a difference. I'm a big believer that change comes from the grassroots up. And a lot of the stories that we've done, whether it was about fracking or pipeline issues or whatever, they have success. They get notoriety in part because the people at the bottom of the heap don't want these things in their backyard, whether it's a parked barge or a pipeline or a fracking well. Rather than oftentimes the opposition will say, well, this is a top-down thing. This is, you know, celebrity or big voices saying we don't want these things. But what we've experienced is that a lot of the change that's happened in the Hudson Valley in protecting the environment comes from the grassroots up, and some of that has been encouraged by media.
I'll add something. First of all, I want to make a shout out to Ann Toomey because I just texted her privately, but I've been using her article since 2009 in my art community technology class. And it actually breaks down different ways that you can work in a community and do community development. And I'd like to make this connection to storytelling with your article, actually, right? Because there's a deep connection to, you know, whoever is the media maker or the person who has the tools to have the story be told. How are they engaging with the community in a way that's respectful of the community and that positions the subjects of the story in a place that's truly empowered? And that's like a daily practice to strategize that. But to me, that's really at the core of how I think about storytelling, is trying to think about the different roles I play as a media practitioner and as a community organizer using media. So just want to thank you. And it's really fun that we ended up here together. And that I could use your ideas so early on, before you even moved into the environmental realm, right? That guide me in my practice with community members and experimental documentary practice.
Thanks so much, Branda. That's exciting that it's been helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. That article I actually wrote after my master's, and I'd been working in Nicaragua, and I wrote it because I think I went in with kind of a white savior mentality when I first started working in different parts of Latin America. I went when I was 21 to Mexico, and I think I'm like a white savior in recovery is how I describe myself. It's like, because I feel like a lot of training has taught, and when I was young, it was like, go make an impact, like go into the world and make an impact. And don't think about what people have done before, you know, the communities and like the legacy of the other people before you or the organizations that exist there and have been there for 30 years, just go and make an impact, right? And so it's been a long wake up from that mentality of, no, you don't do that. You first research and like learn about who is in the place and the work they're doing. And then, you know, after a long time of listening, you can start thinking about how you can actually make an impact, but it's a process, right? And I think it's something that like I am really, struggle with my current students in very much trying to make sure that they don't, when I tell them, oh, I've been in like Mexico or Bolivia, like, oh, Professor Toomey is like gone to these places, I'm gonna go there. And okay, let's let's have a conversation, right? But it's a challenge. It's because I feel like there's so many like white savior films out there, and just like the narrative is just constant. And so like you have to kind of do what you can to challenge that narrative on a regular basis. And I think it's just something we all have to think about constantly, especially for an educated role, right?
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing that up. I think it's really important to be cognizant of these tropes, right? Like the stories that are sort of codified, and the ethics around storytelling, and that white savior narratives are very damaging and hurtful. And if anyone's not familiar with that terminology, that's talking about when white people come into communities and tell stories about Black, Indigenous, or people of color in a way that's not particularly respectful, that's really centering the white person in their savior role, as opposed to, as Anne mentioned, all the groundwork that had already been done by a lot of those communities. So I think that's really important, that the role as a storyteller comes with certain ethical responsibilities, and that we should be really aware of that. And so,
Emily,
yeah.
Does anyone sense that white savior complex is changing or not? It's obviously for anyone.
That's a good question. And I'm going to add on to John's question with my follow-up too, which is how storytelling can share new or voices that maybe haven't been heard in the past in water science and management. So, if that white savior narrative is changing, how can we provide provide a platform for voices that maybe haven't been heard before?
And I have some good examples of how I think it is changing, but I'd love to hear if people think it's not changing.
I'll speak to that. I know I'm not on the panel, but I'd just like to mention that I think oftentimes there's storytelling for all different purposes, and many times it's storytelling for fundraising is a thing. And that is particularly a place where we should be very ethically responsible in not making fundraising choices around other people's stories and centering, this white savior narrative in those scenes. I think, in this conversation, we're really talking about water science and scientific information. And so some of those opportunities might be a little bit different, but I just wanted to vocalize that in particular.
I'm curious to hear what Jon has to say.
Yeah. Well, no, I have a long history with National Geographic going back to 1989. My first assignment was to cover a dog sledding expedition that went across Antarctica, 3,741 miles in 220 days. But in order to be qualified for that job in 1988, I had to go down to DC and go to the Geographic headquarters and be interviewed by a half dozen white men of a certain age as to my qualifications, etc. And that was an institution that thrived on sending white guys of a certain age around the world to report on other cultures and other places. And the change I've witnessed in the last half dozen years, last decade, is that's changed incredibly. Is that it dawned on someone that actually there are really great East Indian photographers and writers, really great photographers in China. You don't have to send a white guy halfway around the world to tell these stories. I say a huge change in that realm, in that storytelling realm. So I was just curious if anyone else is witnessing that or experiencing that in other mediums or not.
I think some nonfiction books, when I think about, there was the era of the 3 Cups of Tea books, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Greg Mortensen.
Yeah, and then that was debunked, his whole I did read that book many years ago, and it probably was inspirational to me at the time. But yeah, it was essentially, a lot of it was a lie, and I think those types of books are not, there's not such an appetite for those types of books anymore. So I think that the types of books that are out there are hopefully more honest portrayals of people's experiences, and actually tell us something that we can learn from, as opposed to this vision, this idealized vision of going and saving some community somewhere.
Yeah, but anyway, I think my experience is that white savior complex, thankfully, is starting to dwindle.
I think it's so interesting to hear about, the changes in the storytelling, but also, again, in the receiving of those stories. And so if something is not well received by the community, that's not going to be a very effective story. And so hopefully, we see that change over time as well, that it comes from both sides. I'm going to get to some of your questions now. So we've gotten some really good ones in the Q&A box. This is a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in. So someone notes that Branda and Kathy's video made me wonder, youth has been stressed several times. Is there a certain age group you like to reach? Is there such a thing as too young for environmental education? And I'm thinking about Will's children's book as maybe having something to say on this question as well.
For the media, like a video documentary like this, and for the radio productions, I think that high school is a great age. But there's all kinds of fabulous things with younger people. We did a workshop just this afternoon with robots testing, measuring the air, with an artist named Maria Michaels, who was working, the kids loved it, right? And it also makes me think about when we brought Brandon Ballingy and made our own, what did he call that workshop, Kathy, where we saved things from fish from the Hudson and made a little aquarium?
Yeah, it was the Echo Action Aquarium, where they were able to observe some very young fish grow a little bit, and then we released them back into the Hudson. Yeah, I think actually no age is too young, in my opinion. We, as Branda was saying, we work with middle school kids and have done workshops for even younger kids. So I think it's great and we have students who are mentoring other students. So that's a way that you can keep, kind of bringing in younger students and keep older students engaged, and try to just keep getting younger and younger. That's our goal.
Yeah, I would just add, I totally agree with Kathy. I think, there's almost no level of age that you can't be sort of engaged with, whether it's really hard science or kind of pre-science things that are preparing you for that experience. I think you can be engaged very early, and that's always very enriching moving forward, so that's my idea with my book is, it could be pretty much any age. Interest in nature is pretty universal. I think at any age you can start getting sucked into that for sure. So.
But I'll just add that, we have had a lot of experience with students who maybe have never really spent that much time at the river, or spent that much time with their hands in the soil, looking at worms and bugs. And at first they're really not into it. And then all of a sudden, as I said with that example earlier, they begin to develop this interest in it because they can see the really complexity of this life that they're looking at and what it means. And whether it's a pollution problem or not, it doesn't matter. Like, there's so many different ways of looking at these living environments that I think does spark, a curiosity. And that's really where you start, I would hope, is just to spark a curiosity and get students of any age sort of engaged.
I think often there's this idea that, certainly with child development, right, your methods to work with youth might be different. I'm so sorry about my cat. This is but I think often, Kathy, I think you said something about getting your hands wet. When you get your hands wet, something really transforms. It becomes really tangible. And I think that for adults, that play and that curiosity is really important too, and sometimes undervalued. So just to mention that. We have another question about how you get the word out to your community about your projects. So how did you, in these various storytelling projects, how did you decide what community partners to work with? And what was the approach to get the word out to the community about your projects?
I think we all have an answer, just no one wants to go first. You know, we use all the different social media that's available. It's remarkable how efficient it is. I mean, I think the one interesting thing about environmental stories is that they are pretty nonpartisan. You know, I'll show a film at the Basilica in Hudson, and then the next day I'll go across the road, across 87 to New Baltimore, and show it the same film in a volunteer fire department, and we get good crowds of both. I mean, I really think that we're at a tipping point here where everyone is interested in environmental stories, no matter the politics, etc. So I think it's getting easier and easier actually to share your stories. That's my experience here in the Hudson Valley.
I'll add something. I mean, for us, when we look for partners, we try to find a space where there can be a natural exchange that's really valuable on both sides. And if we find a balance where we're really contributing to the partner through this project, and the partner is really contributing to us, then that always becomes this fruitful space that expands way beyond expectation.
But Branda, I'll just add, I'm going to give a shout out to you right here. Branda is like an amazing communicator and somebody who's on the phone a lot with people, kind of connecting people and making sure and checking in with people and sort of doing a lot of that, which I'm not as good at. And you really do, you do make these sort of connections so that then people begin to talk amongst themselves, is what I'm saying. You're like a catalyst that starts that. So that just to piggyback on what you're saying, because I think it's really quite a complicated question that you're asking. And I do think that people are really responding to, our climate crisis because it is more in the media, because it is more of a crisis. And so we are seeing people generally sort of respond to things, which is great. But there's also so much work ahead that people need to do. So it's good that they are.
It's so funny you said that, Kathy, because that's one of Ann Toomey's active alternative roles of the community development agent is as catalyst.
There you go.
And do you want to respond to that?
To the question, or
or to the reference in your work?
Oh God, I wrote that article so long ago. I can't remember what's in it. But
you also had facilitator.
Right. Well, the question, so how to engage, like how we met with, initially started working with different groups. So I think part of it is just building relationships. Like, it just takes so long. And so I've been working with the Billion Oyster Project for about 4 or 5 years. And the reason why I started working in Coney Island Creek was because one of the community organizers with the Billion Oyster Project essentially invited me to come and do some research there, see what they're doing. They're actually in the picture behind me. Let's see, here we go. They're putting in an community oyster reef in that picture. And through that relationship that's been ongoing, there's just been opportunities to meet different other community-based groups and present to them and on the different work, participate in things like my estuary day, just go and like get a table and hand out flyers. I mean, we've done that. And even just being at the waterfront and chatting with people, and then you have more of a conversation about what you're doing and why, and so it's like just kind of showing up is half of it, right? And then keep showing up in the same place it's been a little hard with COVID because we couldn't do a field season last year. We couldn't do any presentations at the YMCA on what we've done. But hopefully this is a blip. So.
Will, any thoughts on working with partners or communicating and getting the word out?
Well, yeah, I mean, I felt a little, this was the first sort of grant project that I worked with. So I don't have a lot of experience, but I would just maybe say that is that it's really incredible when there's that kind of synergy between these local groups and they kind of get together and engage artists and stuff like that. So I was really, really thankful for the opportunity to be engaged with that. And that, so that was kind of my experience in this project. That was kind of connected me to the community that way. And I don't know, I felt it was very enriching, so programs like that are great.
Great. Thank you. So we're closing in on our last couple minutes. We had someone ask for any specific recommendations for a first try at incorporating storytelling into a college course. And so I'm going to actually zoom out a little bit from this question, because I see that Anne has already responded to it with a couple of recommendations. But what advice would you like to leave people with who are interested in storytelling, whether they're interested in teaching about storytelling or doing some storytelling themselves? What advice would you like to share with the folks out there? Maybe we can go down the line and in the order that we've been using. So we'll start with Jon.
Yeah. Well, interesting. My big mistake when I started teaching this environmental storytelling class at Bard was that I was putting all the emphasis on the environmental issues, and I didn't really understand that these students, despite the fact that they were very thoughtful and really interesting thinkers and actually really good writers, had never had real training in how to tell a story. And I was stunned. I mean, we got about 5 weeks into the first class, and a student put up his hand and said, well, how do I tell a story? So I think that almost is, before you get to the subject matter, you almost have to make sure that people are comfortable telling a story. For some of us, me, that's what I've always done, tell stories. So it came naturally, but for a lot of students, especially, I think it's interesting to give them things to read, give them examples of good writing that you like, and whether it's profiles or issue-oriented stuff. And then encourage them to investigate. So I switched around my curriculum so that I actually start with how do you tell a story versus what story are you interested in telling.
Great, thank you. Kathy, any advice?
Yeah, thanks, Jon. That was really good advice, actually. When I teach stuff, I often give a lot of examples and kind of break them down structurally so that people can see how they're constructed. So that's one part. But I also really encourage students or anyone who's involved in storytelling to really include some part of themselves in the story. To make something, when you make something personal, then you begin to have a touch point, I think, for people to enter the story in some way. And sometimes it means revealing vulnerabilities or something about yourself that's maybe, not that public, or that shows that, you're sort of maybe feeling like you're a little bit of an outsider. And that's an important part for everybody to hear. So I think that's something that's also key for me. But students, I mean, the ones that I've worked with often have a very keen sense of storytelling just innately. So it's kind of amazing just to let them go.
Branda?
Yeah, I would carry on what Kathy's saying about grounding storytelling in personal expertise, in personal experience, in passion, in your own personal passion. And if you can find that as a foundation for a student, then that's a space where they can start creating generative dialogue around their subject. because they're grounded. And I think that that is really critical. And whether it's college students or little kids, actually, or any of us. And then the other point I just wanted to make is that environmental storytelling can't be siloed. It is critical to be in parallel with intersectional justice storytelling. I think that right now, as we're watching our Water Justice Lab fellows telling the story about their experience, being with Water Justice Lab, they're really making these important connections between environmental justice and racism. They actually did an interview where they learned about the forcible relocation of the Native American tribes that were right there at the Hudson, and realized that they're still suffering from the same hate that was connected to that forcible relocation. And that if you look at it from the ancestors, point of view of storytelling, the mother, our earth is our mother, right? And so they're really starting to make those deep connections between the violation of Black bodies and the environmental justice issues. And I think that's a really, really important linkage to make, to really create a rich story that's not just disconnected from, the historic systemic trauma that is at the core of environmental justice, environmental devastation, and racism.
Thank you, Branda. Will, any advice?
Yeah, everything everybody said is amazing. I definitely agree with the idea that our sort of personal experiences, of course, a story, like every human being who exists, is sort of living out their own story. And I think being given the confidence to believe that your individual story is worth telling and worth hearing, I think is a wonderful way to start. I think giving kids that sort of sense that, it's not just these people or these special kind of people that get to tell stories. It's you, it's everybody, that's how we create the richness of the human experience. And then, I would just say to what Branda said, participating in the world and really looking around and seeing things honestly is a million stories emerge from really looking at the world and really trying to understand it and perceive it rather than just kind of glazing over, in those details and stuff like that. So that would be my contribution.
Thanks so much. Anne.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone covered most things. I'll just post a couple of stories I like in the chat. So the Moth is a storytelling event, a live storytelling event, and these are two environmental ones that I share with my students, and to get them to think about what are the key elements, how are the emotion, why does the story matter, how is this person telling the story, how is it moving you or making you think differently about the environment. So those are two really great ones. And if you're looking to engage students, I'll play them. And actually it seems awkward, but the students seem to like it and listen and laugh along with the stories. And then someone posted in the chat also about like, what does it look like to have a community? It's all hands on deck. And I just want to mention Pamela Pettyjohn, who works in Coney Island Creek. She has the Coney Island Beautification Project, and she talks a lot about kitchen table conversation. She's like a 20 or 30 year long resident. And so that for her, like she's mobilized so much of the Coney Island community in getting the word out about, Coney Island Creek and the pollution and stewardship and citizen science. And so, I think for me, when I think of that, like all hands on deck, I think of Pamela Pettyjohn and the work she's doing. That's very homegrown in Coney Island Creek.
Great, thank you so much. We are going to be sending out an email to everyone who registered for this event with links and resources. We are saving the chat and we'll be sharing that. So don't worry if you didn't get to click on something, we'll make sure that everyone gets the amazing resources that have been shared over the course of this session. And I did want to read this out loud as sort of a closing reflection for us going forward. So, the comment was that Brenda mentioned that prior to this experience of going down to the river, with this youth program that the kids had not had a connection to the water, and historically people of color are left out of the environmental movement in general. So what does it look like to have a community that is all hands on deck to protecting and connecting with water? And so I think that each of you have answered that in a different way, and we could have a whole nother, and I'd love to have a whole nother panel discussion with you all sometime. But I'd like to leave that as sort of a closing reflection and thinking about our work and what we can do to tell stories about water that are engaging and participatory and ethical, that have an impact, and that really uplift voices that may have been left out in the past. So with that, I'd like to thank our fantastic panelists. Let's give them all a round of applause. I know I'm probably the only person unmuted. You can probably only hear me, but thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. We know it was a beautiful day and we really appreciate you being here. So look for an email from me in the coming days with lots of information. And we really look forward to continuing these important conversations on water science and storytelling. So have a great night, everyone.